All right, good afternoon, New Zealand. It's Sarah Smith here, and I'm joined by the lovely Elliot Ikilei. He is, as most of you, or hopefully most of you will know, he's the second in charge of the new Conservative Party here in New Zealand. Welcome, Elliot. It's such a pleasure to have you on the Sarah Smith Speaks podcast, whatever we're doing.
Kia ora, whakalofa. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really lovely to be here.
So I think we should start with the fact that we're in a historic election here in New Zealand, and there was a poll that came out last night, and maybe you could just talk to us about how you're feeling about that poll.
Yeah, so the poll was quite fascinating. Of course, they delayed the poll on purpose so that it could be used for the debate that was held last night, so that was quite interesting in itself. And it showed that at the moment, Labour, on the poll anyway, could govern on its own. National was down about less than 30%, I think, and New Conservative and New Zealand First were neck to neck. So we'll take more of those voters because we are the actual Conservative Party, and so it was quite cool. Not bad. I want more. I want a lot more, but it was a pretty good way because it shows exactly what we've already seen, and that is that even when many people didn't know who we were still appearing at 1%. We always said that. And so what we found is that less than 20% of the country knew who we were, and suddenly, now that more people know who we are, then our poll results actually go exponential. So we looked at the numbers, and since April, May, we've actually had a 400% increase in our numbers. So that's awesome. It's something that we've seen. Not only that, one of the other good things as well is that historically and internationally speaking, those parties who are left or liberal get less votes than they poll at. Those parties who are conservative or right-wing get more votes than they poll at. So that even adds to it. So it is pretty exciting. I want more, and I'm sure we'll get more in the coming weeks.
So for people that aren't necessarily politically minded, could you break down those numbers for us from that poll earlier in the year until now? So a lot of the time we've been anywhere between 0.4, then we went to 0.8, so we were around that area. When we took the extra poll from one of the last Colma Brunton polls, and we were still at 1%, and we were tearing our hair out. Well, you know, I can't do that, but those of us who do have hair, they were tearing their hair out, and we were going, okay, what's going on? That's when we found that 17% of New Zealanders knew who we were. So 17% of New Zealanders knew who we were, yet we were still coming up at 1%, which was incredible, because then if you extrapolate out that data, suddenly we look at 5.8, 5.9, 6% coming up in that regard. So then you look at that. Now, as people become more and more aware of us, naturally they love our policies and who we are and what we're about and what we stand for, and so the numbers just raise and they rack up. And we are also, to our friends, to our colleagues in the New Zealand First Party, those who are the voters, now more and more of them are coming over because they've realised that they've been betrayed by Mr. Peters and his team. So we are actually doing really well, and we're grateful too, because we are from the community, we're part of the community, we're not politicians or anything like that. So awesome. And you've got candidates in every single electorate?
Every single electorate.
That's congratulations.
Thank you very much. We are one of the only two parties, I believe. Not even National have the amount of candidates we have. So we've got a candidate in every single seat, including the Māori seats, every single one. And I believe that means that we're one of only two parties who've been able to achieve that. And that's, again, our people from the fields that they come from want to step in and help us.
Awesome. So you've got more engagement in candidacy, and you've got more engagement, more people knowing you now. What do you think's been, what's the upward trajectory come down to there?
True grassroots is the big one. So it really is oddly word of mouth and a digitized word of mouth aspect. So when you look at social media, that's what social media is. Social media by itself is actually a word of mouth being put onto a digital platform. And because, again, we are grassroots, so I've spent nearly 20 years in youth work, the leaders spent 30 years in building. Many of us come from the decades in the fields that we've been through, so we've earned our integrity, we've earned the right to have a reputation, our name out there. And that's why also our policies do really well, because we know what it's like to work double shifts in graveyards, we know what it's like to freak out and and try to figure out, okay, my child's sick, but I've run out of sick leave, so I've got to work out how to get that over to mum-in-law. You know, we know that because that's what we've lived, and it's something which the politicians don't have an idea about. So it comes from that grassroots, knowing people, dealing with every people all the time, and then that word spread and spread. And social media just spread it even more so, which is probably why also the polls have not been so kind to us. Because it's a real grassroots movement, often some of our people won't even engage in those poll aspects.
And so there is a bit of a double-edged sword with the social media, though, isn't there? Because it can be a little bit misleading, particularly if you've got people from, you know, outside of New Zealand watching your stuff or clicking on your posts, or if they're getting caught, if they're really loving the message. So I guess there's a bit of a balance of not just assuming that if you're doing well on social media that you're going to be actually translating that into votes.
Yeah, no, it's a fair comment, and it's really hard to find data sets on that as well, because if you've got even Cambridge Analytica back in 2016 with the US election, they weren't really able to figure out, you know, okay, we've got social media, then if we come up with a calculation, say, right, social media likes, loves, engagements, levels, reaches, all of that stuff, and then pop it into a machine and then popping out with this means that you'll get this vote, that's not quite the way in which it works. So what we do say is that on social media, word of mouth spreads, we collect a lot of the hate and the complaints and the positives and the glowing recommendations and all that sort of stuff. So what we can see is that there's a powerful grassroots movement, and so social media has allowed us to engage in that a lot more and a lot easier, but you don't know really if that's going to come out in the votes. And I think for me, that's also one of the big things about the 2016 US election, is that you had the polls were way out. You had, in fact, I saw one particular poll actually give Trump a 0%. I mean, you think you'd give him a 1% or something, but they just gave a 0%. So the polls were so wildly out of whack that it upstarted the entire digital world. And I think that's sort of where we're at in New Zealand today.
And so when you talk about you know, that powerful kind of grassroots movement that you're capitalising on, what do you see as actually swinging people to a maybe more conservative centre, like
probably there's a couple of things, and I'm thinking about when we hit our own particular milestones. So one aspect is that it's our party who've been able to expose a lot of things going on. So it was our party who first exposed to the public the UN Migration Compact, and then that blew up. Then we were also the ones to expose Mates and Dates program. So we have been the ones to expose to the public that gender ideology is here, and it is encouraging your children to question their gender. We also were the party to expose even the new youth prison that's going out in Clendon, and the fact that was being not hidden, but definitely not discussed about. Well, no, it probably was a bit hidden because they refused to discuss it. So we've been able to expose things that has been happening in Parliament and then has been out there, so they've gone into play. So that's probably one aspect, and I would say probably the big one is our policies are built by our people. Our people are frontliners. So 80% of our people are or have owned small and medium business. Our people are also prison officers and youth workers, and tradies. They're in the field. They're in the field and they've been in the field for years. So our policies make sense to those people who've lived it. Rather than being led by the two most disconnected groups of people in the world, which is politicians and academics, our ones come from those who have gained some academic but have lived and breathed and worked in the field and lost and won, and realize that life is a lot more different than it is on an executive summary or some portfolio account that they can have.
So I'd just like to go a little bit back to what you were just talking about there, the things that you've exposed. Just because I would again like to talk to people who have maybe never heard about the New Conservatives, or they're kind of been a bit disenfranchised by the two larger parties, or even maybe some of the smaller parties. Yep. When you talk about the Migration Compact, what was that about, and what was your concern with it?
So the UN Migration Compact, when we discovered it, we looked through what it was, and we found it was quite shocking. What it effectively does is it opens up, or it removes democratic process, or rather sovereignty properties from a country whose incoming migrants are coming into the country. So that also means that whether you're legal or illegal, it doesn't matter. If you are a person from say Russia, and you're saying, no, get stuffed, I don't want to go through the normal legal channels, I'm just going to get on a boat and get to New Zealand. If they enter New Zealand, then they are being pushed to have the social welfare, free education, free housing, the jobs, and basically gain all of the access of New Zealand as if they were a citizen. And that, of course, breaks every sort of aspect around sovereignty and nationalism that you can have, because New Zealand is actually quite a tough place to get to. We're not easy to become a citizen or a PR of, and so we should be a difficult country, because we're quite a precious resource. We've got a beautiful land where we are isolated. We've got one of the greatest peace stability type movements. We are a valuable country, and we need to keep that valuable aspect there. So it should be hard. My family, my wife is an immigrant, so they came over and they went through the whole process. The UN Migration Compact wipes out the idea of a border, says that a country must use their own taxes in order to give social welfare and housing and education and all that to anyone who just manages to get into the country. And it also does some other things. For example, it penalises any media outlet who gives an article that wants to say or be critical on the migrant aspects coming in. So if you've got a huge bunch of migrants coming in, and for whatever reason they're stealing children, it's nonsense, but they're stealing children. Under the UN Migration Compact, if a media outlet is reporting on that, then they will be penalised by the government. That's incredible. I think it's a Section 15 or Article 15 of that. And there are quite a few other elements. My last one that strikes me as shocking is that one of the other parts of the little details is that the UN will provide an administrator for the UN Migration Compact to actually go to each country. You're reading books like Animal Farm and you use the words like political officer, and it's incredible. It just looks, that's the definition of it. So we brought that up, and we brought it up. Then ACT jumped on that, and then National jumped on that, and that was great, because then it suddenly burst out of the scene. It looks like ACT maybe has rescinded a bit, and maybe they're actually supporting it a bit. I'm not entirely sure. National, a little bit, I think they're more removing away from that. So we stand totally opposed there. We would cut that. One of our policies is that we would burn it. It's a horrific document of borderless and globalism that exists. We don't want that. Every country should be able to run it. Not only that, also our ideological allies and partners actually said, no, we won't sign it either, which was really good. But New Zealand... And the thing that made me... Up until this stage, I told our entire team to leave New Zealand First alone. New Zealand First, Winston Peters, they said, it's not legally binding, yada, yada, yada. And they just kept on trying to palm it off, but it wouldn't leave. He got really angry. So essentially what happened was that on the last hour of the last day of Parliament in 2018, that's where Winston Peters said, by the way, I've signed it. Waiata, Karakia, everyone gone. And I thought that was such a disgraceful and contemptuous use of that time, and just a disgraceful way of treating us as New Zealanders and those who believe in democracy and sovereignty.
Wow. Yeah, it's phenomenal what gets passed under urgency, or at the last minute, or just before Christmas, or when everyone's kind of under COVID, when people aren't really looking, and then it's done. So that's been passed. So if the New Conservatives had their way, you would repeal the whole thing, or how would
we would slice and dice. We would get rid of it. Incredibly.
So who does it actually serve?
Well, it does serve particular ideas around borderless avenues, and that of course serves generally the United Nations style of thinking. I wouldn't say UN ideology, but definitely their current way that they view how the world should operate.
And so was that what Trump was, when he talks about building a wall, and he's very strong on making sure that immigrants into the US come in legally through the right means? So is that, it sounds very similar to what the Democrats over there want, where they just want to let whoever can get through, and then they just get the same rights as...
Yeah, the Democrats are I don't want to say insane, but I think the Democrats... I think it's no surprise to know that the Democrats were the original party of slavery. It makes no surprise to me that they used black people just to walk over their backs and pretend falsely that they were actually the ones to look after black people. I think the Democrats are, I think historically they probably were okay in some ways for some people perhaps, but I think overall the Democrats are like New Zealand Labour. Idealistic, but to the point of ignoring basic fact and historical fact. I think their ideas of globalism and the Great Reset and the ruthlessness with which they want to deal with people and free speech and the human proclivity to want to engage in discussion and disagreement, I think is incredibly dangerous. I think Marxism/socialism does appear on their radar quite a lot, and of course we've seen 100 million men, women and children die from that, and they still seem to grab onto it. So I'd say that the Democrats of the US and the Labour Party of New Zealand are very closely aligned, if not totally aligned.
Yeah, so while we're talking about the Democrats and the left, I suppose the biggest thing at the moment is the Black Lives Matter.
Yep.
And how you're seeing a lot of kind of the way that the Black Lives Matter movement is being treated compared to, you know, the anti-lockdown protests, or you know, any free speech rallies, or the way that, yeah, they've kind of gone and they're rioting now, and it's all considered, you know, let's let them just go with it because they're protesting.
Well, Black Lives Matter don't care about black lives. If Black Lives Matter cared about black lives, they'll be rolling down to the abortion clinics and standing to and saying, why are you killing so many black babies? Why is it that disproportionately there are more Planned Parenthood facilities in the black and Hispanic neighborhoods rather than the other neighborhoods? Also, you don't see them marching down South Central Los Angeles, because the number one cause, if you die and you're a young black man in America, the number one cause of your death is murder at the hands of a young black man. But you don't see them going into the gang areas and saying, hey, don't kill black people. No, they're just rolling around. What I have seen of them tends to be, first and foremost, is that their very movement is actually based off deception. It is based off the actual lie. From the Michael Brown account, which states one account, but it has been turned out to be false. Even from those witnesses who were there, it becomes false in every objective status that you can find. So it's started off a lie. It's run by people who have stated themselves in an interview that they are trained Marxists. If you look through their website itself, they are against the family, they're against the idea of Western values, and they push mostly about LGBTQIA plus ideology. That's what it is. The black people aspect, the black lives aspects, it seems to be more of a platform. It's got nothing to do really with anything else. And I would also point to the Ferguson effect, where you had, I think it was 16 cities checked, and those 16 cities where Black Lives Matter were in, and then they left, you had spikes in robbery, rape and murder in those 16 cities, and it was generally pointed to police disengaging because of greater restrictions or fear of being called racist themselves. So Black Lives Matter do not care about black lives. That is actual fact, and it's I think that they will harm a lot of people, or they have hurt a lot of people already. And I really feel also for the two police who were recently shot in the head by some scumbag who ran off, and he was probably a BLM supporter as well. So yeah, Black Lives Matter don't care. And I'll put this out there too with Auckland. 4,000 people marched for the Black Lives Matter movement in Auckland. But I didn't see anyone marching around for the beautiful kid in South Auckland who was bashed down and died in the South Auckland street. Beautiful baby, you know. I didn't see anyone marching for that. I marched in the March for Moko. I didn't see any Black Lives Matter people there. You'd be lucky to get maybe at top 1,000 across the country. Yeah, they weren't there, so they got whipped up into fury. Anyone who wants to support Black Lives Matter doesn't actually understand Black Lives Matter. Yeah, and then you say, well, don't all lives matter? Yep. And you get labelled a racist, or a white supremacist, or whatever. Only in an environment so far to the left could you view equality as racism. And then it was funny, I was having a back and forth on Twitter saying, and I said this to Lee the other day when I was talking to him, that they actually, when you end up saying like, well, Martin Luther King said you should judge the man by the content of his character and not by the colour of his skin, and they come back and say, oh, but if you don't judge the person by the colour of their skin, then you're racist. Yeah, and they're racist. Yeah. They are racist.
They are the racists. And then they just cancel you and block you.
I forgot who said it, but this person said lives matter. If you're going to put a colour before it, you're the racist.
Yeah, that's right. So it's all gone a bit topsy-turvy. And
they haven't thought. They're just happy to be conformists. They're happy just to do what they're told. They don't know what they're talking about.
And so how does this then link into, critical race theory and kind of where they're trying to, that postmodernist view that people of colour do just poorly because there's systemic racism within the system?
There is no, or I used to fight for quite a while that there is no systemic, or sorry, not systemic, but institutional racism. That is, that there's a law or policy put in place in law where it states that if you are white or brown or black or whatever, then you will be treated worse than others. Now I can't actually say that. So currently in 2 of our DHBs, for example, I am Māori of Pacifica. Now, just because I'm Māori and Pacifica